It is the middle of the night, when most of the world is asleep and the silence feels too heavy to breathe through. But for those who work the night shift, this darkness isn't peaceful. It's alive. These are 5 real stories from people who swear they'll never look at the night the same way again. Story number 1. The Man in the Freezer. Marcus had been working the graveyard shift at the 24-hour convenience store for almost 2 years. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. The quiet suited him. No crowds, no chaos, just the low hum of the refrigerators and the occasional trucker stopping by for gas and coffee. He liked the stillness of the night. It was predictable, peaceful, until the night it wasn't. That night began like every other. The clock on the wall read 2:40 a.m. Marcus stood beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, half asleep, restocking shelves in the freezer section. The store was empty. The parking lot outside deserted except for one flickering streetlight that buzzed endlessly. A light rain tapped against the glass doors at the front of the store. He pushed the heavy cart of frozen goods toward the back, shivering slightly as the freezer doors hissed open. The rush of cold air felt sharper than usual, biting at his skin even through his jacket. He frowned. The temperature had always been chilly, but this was different, unnaturally cold. It made his breath visible in faint white clouds. He rubbed his hands together, trying to ignore the strange chill creeping into his bones. Marcus started stacking ice cream tubs on the top shelf when something caught his attention. A faint smudge on the inside of the glass door. He leaned closer. It was a handprint, small, faint, but clearly pressed from the inside. He squinted, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was just condensation, he thought. Or maybe someone had touched it earlier during a delivery. He wiped it away with his sleeve and went back to work. A minute later, the cold seemed to deepen again. His fingertips ached as he reached for another box. He shut the freezer door and turned to grab more stock, but then he froze. The handprint was back. This time it was clearer, more defined. And it wasn't alone. Another appeared beside it. Then another. Slowly, they began forming one after another, spreading across the glass like frost patterns. But these weren't random shapes. They were distinct, human, pressed flat against the inside of the door. Marcus stared in disbelief. His chest tightened as he stepped closer, fogging up the glass with his breath. The prints were small, like the hands of a child, or something that had been trapped inside for a long time. He backed away, rubbing his arms. The air felt thicker now, heavier. Then, the lights flickered. Once, twice. The low hum of the freezers dimmed for a moment before returning. Marcus's eyes were fixed on the glass. Through the frost, he saw movement. A faint shadow shifted on the other side. He blinked hard, telling himself it was just his reflection, except it wasn't moving like him. It was slower, deliberate. Then he saw it. A face pressed against the other side of the door. Pale, eyes wide and hollow, the mouth slightly open like it was trying to speak or scream. But no sound came out. The frost formed around its features, sealing it behind a thin veil of ice. Marcus stumbled backward, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. His voice sounded small against the silence. He turned and hurried toward the counter, fumbling for the store phone, but his hands were shaking too much. Behind him, there was a faint crack, a sound like ice fracturing. He turned around slowly. The freezer door was fogging over completely, the glass vibrating slightly as if something inside was pushing against it. The handle rattled. Then, with a loud click, it swung open on its own. A wave of freezing air poured out, spilling across the floor. It felt like stepping into a blizzard. Marcus stumbled backward, covering his face from the cold. He could see his breath in thick clouds now. The lights above flickered violently, buzzing with static. The temperature plummeted in seconds. Marcus's teeth chattered as he took a hesitant step forward, peering into the open freezer. The boxes inside were undisturbed, perfectly stacked, empty, nothing but shelves and frost. But the glass door began to fog again, on the outside this time. A fresh handprint slowly appeared where his own had been moments ago, and then another. Marcus turned and ran for the back office, slamming the door shut behind him. He stood there in the dim light, gasping for breath, listening. The store was silent except for the faint hum of the freezers. After what felt like minutes, he forced himself to check the security monitors. His hands trembled as he switched to the camera feed for aisle 6, the freezer section. Everything looked normal. No movement, no open doors, just the quiet glow of the overhead lights. He exhaled shakily, rubbing his face. Maybe he was just exhausted. The night shift had a way of messing with your head. But as he kept watching, something flickered on the screen. A faint outline. He leaned closer, eyes narrowing. There, on the reflection of the freezer glass, stood a figure. Tall, thin, unmoving, right where Marcus had been moments earlier. His stomach dropped. The figure didn't have a face, just a smooth blur where features should have been, but it was facing him. The camera static deepened, lines streaking across the image, and then, just for a second, the figure moved. Its head turned slowly toward the camera. Marcus jumped from the chair, knocking it over. He grabbed his phone and called the manager, trying to explain what he saw, but his words came out in gasps. The manager told him to stay calm, that it was probably just condensation or a trick of the lights. But Marcus couldn't shake what he'd seen. He refused to go back out there. When the morning staff arrived, they found Marcus sitting in the office, pale and silent. He quit the next day. Later, his coworker reviewed the security footage. From 2:40 a.m. to 3 a.m., Marcus appeared completely alone. The freezer doors never opened on camera. No one else entered or left the store. But at the 2:43 mark, if you pause the footage and zoom in on the reflection behind Marcus, you can see it, just for a fraction of a second. A figure standing right behind him, pale, motionless, its hand resting on the inside of the freezer glass. After that night, employees reported strange cold spots in the store. The temperature in the freezer section sometimes dropped without explanation, even when the thermostat was set correctly. A delivery driver once claimed he saw frost forming on the inside of the door, like someone was breathing against it. The store is still open today. Customers shop there every night, passing the same freezer where Marcus once stood. Most people don't notice anything unusual, but sometimes on quiet nights around 2:40 a.m., employees say the glass fogs up again. And if you look closely enough, past the frost and reflection, you might see what Marcus did. A pale face staring back, waiting to be let out. Story number 2. The Last Patient. Clara had worked as a night nurse at St. Augustine's Hospital for nearly 5 years. Nestled on the edge of a small town, the hospital was quiet, isolated, and old. Too old, in her opinion. Its long, sterile hallways smelled faintly of bleach and something metallic that never quite faded. At night, when the corridors emptied and the world outside fell silent, every creak, every hum of a monitor, and every distant footstep seemed amplified. Clara was used to the rhythm of night shifts, medication rounds, charting, checking vitals, and drinking lukewarm coffee in the break room while the clock seemed to slow to a crawl. But there was one place in that hospital she tried to avoid, the East Wing. That part of the building had been closed off months earlier after an electrical fire. No one had been hurt, but the smoke and water damage were extensive. Still, the staff whispered about it, about what had happened the night of the fire. One patient, a man named William Harrow, hadn't made it. His heart had stopped minutes before they could evacuate him. He was found still in his bed, the sheets barely singed, his expression eerily calm. The fire investigators said it was an accident. The nurses said otherwise. The East Wing had remained closed ever since, sealed off by a pair of heavy double doors with a warning sign taped across them. Restricted area, under renovation. But sometimes, when the nights stretched long and the hospital grew quiet, staff claimed to hear noises coming from that direction. A faint beeping, the squeak of wheels, or a door slowly creaking open. Clara didn't believe in ghosts. At least, she didn't think she did. It was a little after 3 a.m. when it happened. She was finishing her rounds on the west side, double-checking vitals for a patient recovering from surgery, when she heard it, the unmistakable chime of a call button. Ding. The sound echoed faintly through the hall. Clara glanced at the monitor panel near the nurse's station. Every occupied room was accounted for, no call lights were on. Then she heard it again, clearer this time. Ding. The noise was coming from the east side of the hospital, the closed wing. Her stomach tightened. Maybe it was a wiring error, she told herself. Or maybe one of the techs had accidentally reconnected the old panel. But the sound wouldn't stop. It repeated steadily, patient and rhythmic, like someone persistently pressing the button and waiting for help. Clara hesitated at the door marked East Wing, closed for renovation. A thin layer of dust coated the push bar. The small window was dark on the other side, the lights seemingly off. She took a slow breath and pushed the door open. The smell hit her first. Cold air and soot. The faint odor of something burnt still lingered even after months. The emergency lights flickered weakly, bathing the hall in a dim yellow glow. Her shoes squeaked softly on the tile as she stepped inside. The sound of the call button echoed down the hall again, drawing her attention to the last door on the right. Room 108. The red call light above the door blinked faintly, on and off. Clara's chest felt tight. "This is ridiculous," she muttered to herself, trying to sound brave. "Probably just a glitch." Still, her voice trembled. She pushed the door open slowly. Inside, the room was eerily intact. The bed was made neatly, as if waiting for a patient. The monitor beside it was still plugged in, the faint hum of electricity cutting through the silence. And the call button, wired to the wall, was pressed in. Clara frowned and stepped closer. "Who the hell reconnected this room?" she whispered. As she reached to release the call button, the monitor suddenly flickered to life. A single beep echoed through the room, startling her. The green line moved across the screen once, showing a heartbeat. Just one. Then the monitor displayed a name, William Harrow. Clara froze. The name made her stomach drop. She remembered it. He was the patient who died the night of the fire, right here in room 108. Before she could move, the monitor beeped again. Then a faint whisper filled the air. "It's cold in here." The words were soft, but clear enough to make her blood run cold. She spun around, eyes scanning the room. It was empty. Nothing but shadows clinging to the corners and the faint flicker of light from the hallway. "Hello?" she called out, her voice shaky. "Is someone in here?" Silence. Then she heard the faintest sound, a long, slow inhale, like someone breathing behind her. She turned again. Nothing. The call light in the hallway began flashing faster now, pulsing like a heartbeat. The temperature dropped noticeably. She could see her breath mist in the air. Her hands trembled as she backed away from the bed, eyes darting between the monitor and the door. Then every light in the hall went out. One by one, the bulbs popped softly, plunging the east wing into darkness. Only the faint red glow of the exit sign remained, flickering weakly at the far end of the hall. Clara's breath came in quick gasps. She stumbled toward the door, fumbling for her flashlight. The beam cut through the dark just enough to illuminate the corridor. For a split second, she saw movement. A figure standing halfway down the hall. A man. He was pale, wearing a faded hospital gown. His head was slightly tilted, eyes dark and hollow, watching her. Smoke curled faintly from the edges of his body, like invisible flames still clung to him. Clara froze, unable to breathe. The flashlight flickered. When it came back on, he was gone. She ran. Her footsteps echoed as she sprinted toward the exit, shoving the heavy double doors open and collapsing into the main hallway. Her heart pounded in her ears. She didn't stop until she reached the nurse's station. When she told her supervisor what happened, he just stared at her. His face turned pale. "That's not possible," he said quietly. "That entire wing's been disconnected from power for months." Clara insisted she'd seen the light, heard the call button, and watched the monitor turn on. The supervisor shook his head slowly, trying to calm her down. "You must have been tired," he said. "Maybe stress is getting to you." But the next morning, when the maintenance team checked the system logs, they found something they couldn't explain. At exactly 3:12 a.m., Room 108 had registered one active call light and one heartbeat. The monitor had recorded a single pulse before shutting off again. The wires weren't connected to any power source. The room hadn't been entered since the fire. Clara quit the hospital a week later. To this day, the east wing of St. Augustine's remains sealed. The walls have been repainted and the smoke damage covered. But some of the night staff swear they still hear the faint ding of a call button coming from behind those doors. It always happens at the same time, just after 3 a.m. And if you're unlucky enough to be on duty when it does, you might hear a whisper carried down the hall, cold and distant, like a voice from another time. It's cold in here. Story number 3, the janitor's basement. Luis had been the night janitor at the old Midtown office building for almost 3 years. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was steady work, and the pay was enough to keep the lights on at home. The building itself was ancient, built sometime in the 1920s, all brick and steel, with narrow hallways and creaky floors that seemed to groan under the weight of every passing step. During the day, it was filled with chatter, phones ringing, and the clicking of keyboards. But at night, when everyone had gone home, it turned into something else entirely. It was too quiet. The kind of silence that made you notice every sound that didn't belong. Luis didn't mind the night shift. He liked being alone. There was a strange peace to it. But there was one part of the building he always dreaded. The basement. Technically, it was the archival storage floor, filled with decades of files, broken office furniture, and equipment nobody used anymore. The concrete walls were stained with watermarks. The pipes rattled whenever the heat kicked in. And there was always this faint, musty smell, like mildew mixed with something metallic. Luis only went down there once or twice a week to mop or check for leaks, and he always made sure to be quick about it. But on this particular night, something felt off from the moment he clocked in. It was a Friday just after 1 a.m. The building was empty except for him and one security guard stationed in the front lobby. Luis was mopping near the elevator, humming softly to keep himself calm, when he heard a sound that made him stop mid-swipe. Crack. It came from behind him, the distinct sound of the basement door slowly swinging open. Luis frowned. That door was heavy and always stayed shut. He leaned his mop against the wall and turned around, expecting to see the security guard. "Hello?" he called out. His voice echoed down the empty hall. No answer. He waited a moment, listening. Then came another sound. Thud. Scrape. Thud. Footsteps. Slow. Uneven. Coming from the stairwell that led down to the basement. They weren't hurried or casual. They were deliberate, dragging as though someone was struggling to climb the steps. Luis grabbed his flashlight from his belt and aimed it toward the stairwell. The beam cut through the darkness, but the stairs were empty. No movement. "Hey!" he called out again, louder this time. "If someone's down there, you're not supposed to be." Still nothing. For a long moment, the only sound was the low hum of the overhead lights. Then faintly, he heard something else, like a sigh. A long, tired exhale echoing from below. Every instinct told him to walk away. Call security. Pretend he didn't hear anything. But curiosity, and maybe a bit of pride, got the better of him. He didn't want to be the guy who panicked over some old pipes settling, so he took the flashlight in one hand and started down the steps. Each footstep echoed against the concrete, and the deeper he went, the colder it became. The fluorescent bulbs above flickered and buzzed, some sputtering out completely. He could see his breath when he reached the bottom. The basement stretched out before him, a maze of shelves, filing cabinets, and old machinery draped in cobwebs. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of mold. His shoes squeaked faintly as he walked. That's when he saw them. Footprints. A trail of wet marks on the floor, leading from the base of the stairs toward the far end of the basement. He crouched down and shined the flashlight closer. The prints weren't made by shoes. They were bare feet, and they were fresh. His heart started to race. "Someone's down here," he muttered to himself, gripping the flashlight tighter. He followed the prints cautiously, each step echoing louder in the silence. They led him past rows of old filing cabinets and broken furniture until they stopped abruptly in front of a small maintenance closet. Luis hesitated. The door was slightly ajar. He could see nothing but darkness inside. Slowly, he reached out and nudged it open. The flashlight beam revealed a cracked mirror leaning against the wall, a rusted mop bucket, and a stack of empty cleaning supplies. That was it. He exhaled, half relieved, half annoyed. Must have been some kind of leak, he muttered. Water tracks or something. Then he heard it. Breathing, not his own. A slow, raspy inhale right behind him. He spun around instantly, the flashlight beam jerking wildly through the dark. No one was there. The basement was empty. Hello? His voice shook. Who's down here? The only reply was the sound of the fluorescent lights above flickering again. The air seemed to thicken, pressing in around him. The back of his neck tingled. He turned toward the mirror, raising the flashlight. That's when he saw it. In the cracked reflection, standing just over his shoulder, was a figure. It was tall, much taller than him, thin to the point of looking unnatural, with shoulders that sloped forward like a corpse that had forgotten how to stand straight. Its skin looked gray, stretched too tight over bone, and its eyes were dark, sunken holes that seemed to swallow the light. Luis froze. He couldn't breathe. He didn't dare turn around. His pulse hammered in his ears. Then, slowly, the figure in the mirror smiled. It was a small, twitching smile, as if its face hadn't remembered how to move in years. Luis dropped the flashlight. It clattered to the ground, the beam spinning wildly before landing on the wall. When he looked back up, the reflection was gone. The basement fell completely silent again. No breathing, no movement. But something deep inside him knew he wasn't alone. He backed toward the stairs, his trembling hands feeling for the railing. He climbed quickly, refusing to look back. As he reached the top step, the sound started again, those same dragging footsteps now following him. He bolted through the door and slammed it shut, pressing his weight against it as if expecting something to push back. Nothing did. Only silence. When he finally caught his breath, he realized his mop and bucket were still downstairs. He didn't care. Luis left the building early that night without saying a word to the guard. The next morning, when security did their rounds, they found his cleaning cart halfway up the basement stairs. The mop was lying across the steps, and the basement lights were still on. Every single one of them. The guard who went down to turn them off later swore he heard something breathing behind the cabinets, like someone standing just out of sight. Luis quit the next day. When asked why, he simply shook his head and said, "There's someone still down there." To this day, the basement of the old Midtown office building remains off-limits to staff after dark. But sometimes, late at night when the cleaning crews are finishing up, employees say they still hear footsteps coming from the stairwell. Slow, heavy, dragging. And if you're brave enough to look down the steps when it happens, you might catch a glimpse of something moving in the shadows. Something tall, thin, and waiting for someone else to come back. Story number 4. The Call from Inside. For 7 years, Becky had worked the night shift at a small gas station off the highway. The kind of place where the hum of the fluorescent lights was louder than the customers. Nights were usually uneventful. A few truckers stopped for coffee. Locals came for gas, and sometimes she'd see headlights sweep across the windows and vanish into the rain. It was lonely, sure, but Becky didn't mind. She liked the quiet. It was a Thursday night in late October, cold, wet, and unusually dark. Thunder rolled in the distance as a storm swept over the highway. The rain hit the windows in heavy, uneven bursts, drowning out the low static of the radio that played behind the counter. She was refilling the coffee pot when the store's landline phone rang. That startled her. The phone almost never worked. It had been acting up for months, the manager promising to replace it next week every time she asked. Still, she picked it up. Highway 46, gas and go, Becky speaking. Nothing, just static. "Hello?" she said again, frowning. The static grew louder, fuzzing and crackling like someone was breathing through the line. Then it cut out. She hung up, shaking her head. Probably water in the line from the storm. But not even 5 minutes later, it rang again. This time, when she answered, a voice whispered, low and broken, like it was coming from far away. "Don't go outside." Becky froze. "Who is this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. No answer, just the faint sound of breathing. Then, click, the line went dead again. She stood there staring at the receiver. A joke? Some kind of prank call? But how would anyone even get this number? It wasn't listed anywhere. She tried to shake it off and went back to organizing the shelves. The rain outside picked up, slamming against the glass so hard it blurred everything beyond it. That's when she saw headlights cutting through the storm, a car pulling into the lot. It rolled in slowly, its lights flickering across the empty pumps before settling right in front of the store. Becky waited for someone to step out. Nobody did. The car just sat there, engine idling. 5 minutes passed. The wipers moved back and forth, but she couldn't see the driver through the fogged-up windows. It was strange. People usually ran in during weather like this. She picked up the phone to call the police, but the line was dead. Her stomach twisted. Then, the phone rang again. The same landline. The same broken connection that wasn't supposed to work. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" There was silence for a moment, then the same voice, this time shaking, urgent, terrified. "He's here." The line went dead again. Becky dropped the receiver, her heart pounding. She looked toward the windows. The car ES headlights were still off now. Only the faint glow from the streetlight illuminated its wet metal surface. And then, without a sound, the store's doorbell chimed. Someone had opened the door. Becky's head snapped up. The door was standing slightly ajar, the wind pushing it gently open and shut. But no one was there. "Hello?" she called, voice cracking. No response. She stepped out from behind the counter, her shoes squeaking on the wet floor. The cold air from outside drifted in, carrying the smell of rain and asphalt. The parking lot was empty. The car was gone. Her pulse quickened. She rushed to the door, peering out across the lot. Tire tracks glistened in the light, cutting across the wet pavement and disappearing into the darkness beyond the road. She locked the door and backed away, her hands shaking. The storm continued to rage for hours, and Becky refused to leave the counter until sunrise. When the morning shift arrived, she was pale and trembling, clutching a half-finished cup of coffee. Later that day, police came to check the property. They followed the tire tracks from the gas station across the road and into the woods. But the tracks ended abruptly at a ditch, as if the car had just vanished. There were no skid marks, no sign of an accident, no broken branches or debris. Just wet ground and then nothing. But what they found inside the store was even stranger. When they checked the landline's call records, there were only 3 entries for the entire night, each one incoming. All 3 were traced back to the gas station's own phone number. The technician who reviewed the line later said something that made Becky's blood run cold. "The calls didn't come from outside," he explained. "They came from within the station's internal system, like someone was using a second phone that doesn't exist." Becky quit her job that same week. Now, whenever there's a heavy storm, the new employees swear the landline rings again. But no one ever answers because sometimes you don't want to know who's calling. Story number 5. The security camera feed. Ethan had been working as a night security guard at the sprawling Dalton Electronics warehouse for just over a year. The building was enormous, a labyrinth of metal shelves stacked high with electronics, from televisions to computers to servers. By day, the place was alive with activity. Forklifts clanging, boxes being moved, workers calling across aisles. But at night, everything changed. The building felt cavernous, quiet in a way that was almost unnatural, as though it held its breath while the outside world slept. Most nights were uneventful. Ethan would sit in the control room, eyes glued to the bank of monitors, listening to the faint hum of air conditioning and the occasional squeak of a settling floor. Every few hours, he would check a door, scan a hallway, or make a round through the warehouse, flashlight in hand, a sense of mundane vigilance settling over him. There was safety in routine, in knowing the empty aisles were just that, empty. But the night in question was different. It was a cold, rainy Tuesday, the kind of night where the wind rattled the exterior doors and made the roof creak like it was alive. Ethan had just finished a round through Sector 3 when the clock ticked past 3:00 a.m. He returned to the control room and leaned back in his chair, reaching for a lukewarm coffee from the thermos at his desk. The monitors glowed softly in the dark, each screen showing a static view of an aisle or storage area. His eyes were heavy, blinking against fatigue, when one of the cameras flickered. Sector 4. The feed started glitching, the image jumping between static and distorted frames. Ethan frowned, leaning forward. That camera had never given him trouble before. He adjusted the zoom, hoping it was just a technical hiccup. But then he saw it. Movement. A figure. It stood motionless in the center of the aisle, partially obscured by the shelves, head tilted slightly to the side. Pale. Too pale, almost glowing under the dim camera lights. Ethan's heart began to race. At first he thought it must be a warehouse worker, or perhaps a trespasser. But there were no deliveries scheduled for the night. No one authorized to be there, and the figure didn't move. Didn't even blink. Ethan's fingers tightened on the mouse. His breath came faster. "Hello?" he muttered to himself, as if saying it aloud would make it go away. He grabbed his flashlight and decided to check it out in person. He left the control room, the sound of his boots echoing off the concrete floors as he moved toward Sector 4. The warehouse was vast, the overhead lights flickering inconsistently, casting long shadows down the aisles. The quiet was oppressive, pressing against his ears until every small noise, the distant hum of a ventilation fan, the occasional drip of water, felt amplified. When he reached the end of the aisle, he stopped. The flashlight beam swept across the shelves. Empty. Nothing but stacked boxes and metal shelving units. The figure was gone. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. He radioed the control room. "Control, this is Ethan. Sector 4, I'm checking the area. Nothing here." Static crackled through the radio. Then a voice, unfamiliar and distorted, said clearly, "Ethan, where are you? There's someone behind you." Ethan froze. The blood in his veins seemed to turn to ice. Slowly he turned around, shining the flashlight down the aisle. Nothing, just shadows stretching and bending in the flickering light. The air felt thick, heavy, as if it had a weight of its own. His instincts screamed at him to run. He didn't argue. Heart hammering, he sprinted back toward the control room, every step echoing loudly. But when he arrived, the monitors caught his eye, and what he saw rooted him to the spot. The figure was back, exactly where he had been a moment ago in Sector 4. Standing in the center of the aisle, unmoving, facing the camera, its presence was unmistakable, unnerving in a way that words could barely capture. And its face was gone. There were no eyes, no mouth, no nose. Just smooth, featureless skin stretched over the skull, pale and unblemished. It did not blink, did not breathe visibly, yet its existence seemed to dominate the screen. Ethan stumbled backward in shock, almost knocking over his chair. The flashlight slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. The beam skittered across the room before landing on the wall. When he looked back at the screen, the figure's image remained as if etched into the glass. Even unplugging the monitor did not erase it. The faint impression of the face lingered, a ghostly residue of the figure's presence. Ethan's mind raced. Cold sweat dripped down his forehead. He wanted to scream, wanted to call for help, but the radio was dead now, static filling the space where communication should have been. The warehouse, usually dull and predictable, felt alive, watching, waiting. Desperate, Ethan ran toward the exit, ignoring the echoing shadows that seemed to stretch toward him, ignoring the unnatural feeling crawling over his skin, the sense that the warehouse itself was shifting around him. He reached the doors, threw them open, and fled into the cold night, rain pounding against his back. He did not look back. By morning, Ethan had quit. He refused to explain what happened in detail, only telling his supervisor that something wasn't right and leaving the building with his security badge on the counter. The company investigated the night's footage. Nearly every camera feed from 2:50 a.m. to 3:30 a.m. was corrupted, static destroying the images. Audio recordings were distorted, with only faint, unrecognizable whispers remaining. But one still frame survived. It showed Sector 4. The aisle was empty, except for the faceless figure standing exactly where Ethan had been before. Its head tilted, smooth face staring directly at the camera. The detail was clear, unnervingly so. Even from the still image, it conveyed a sense of awareness, as if it had seen Ethan, and now it was aware the cameras had seen it. Technicians were baffled. There was no logical explanation. No one else had been in the building. The lights had not flickered in any other section, and yet the image remained, a frozen testament to something that had occurred but could not be fully explained. Ethan never returned to the Dalton Electronics warehouse. He avoided night shifts entirely, leaving him unable to reconcile his experience with the mundane life he had once known. Friends noticed the change. He jumped at shadows, double-checked locks obsessively, and sometimes woke in the middle of the night sweating, convinced he heard footsteps behind him. Even now, months later, he says he can feel it. Those empty, unblinking eyes, the blank stare lingering in the corners of his mind. He does not speak of it often, but when he does, his voice shakes. Whatever it was, he tells those who ask, it was waiting, watching, and it knows where I've been. The still frame from that night is stored in the company's archives, locked away in a file marked Incident 3-1422, corrupted footage. Technicians rarely access it, unwilling to confront the unsettling image. Yet every so often, someone reports strange anomalies in Sector 4, faint static on monitors, a fleeting shadow moving in a corner, or a vague feeling of being watched. No one has entered the aisle alone at night since. Ethan's story serves as a warning to anyone who works the night shift in isolation. Sometimes the eyes that follow you from the darkness are not human. Sometimes the quiet corners of the world conceal things that are patient, precise, and impossible to forget. Even with the lights on, the hum of machines, and the safety of other people around, Ethan cannot shake the memory of that faceless watcher. A presence that knew his every move, waiting silently in the aisle, head tilted, blank face, staring. And some nights, when he closes his eyes, he swears he can see it again, standing just behind him, unmoving, yet fully aware. These were the nights when silence wasn't empty. It was watching, waiting, breathing. For those who work through the darkness, remember, not everything that moves after midnight is human. If these stories kept you on edge tonight, don't forget to hit like, share your own creepy night shift experiences in the comments, and subscribe for more true horror stories that'll keep you awake forever. Stay safe and never ignore the things you hear after midnight.